Hey, what's going on, guys? We are back again for another episode of Tight Splice Charters, but more specifically, we are moving on to our next episode of the little setup I'm doing here, the little series I'm doing here on the channel that I am calling My Setup. If any of you are new to the channel overall or just new to this little series I'm doing, essentially what it is once a week, I'm picking out a specific bait or technique that I utilize for the most part daily out here on Lake Okeechobee. And I'm just going over my setup that I throw it on. I've said it time and time again. This does not mean that this is the only and the right way to do it. This is just what works for me. I get lots of questions regarding what I throw certain baits and use certain techniques with, line, rods, gear ratio, reel. So I just thought this would be a good way for me just to go over everything I use while out here on the water, and it'll just kind of answer some questions that I get asked a lot of. So this week we are going to move on to, well, let me just say this. This is going to be maybe a little bit more intricate video. It's going to go a little bit longer. And it's because we're actually going to be talking about 3 different techniques in one video because it's all categorized into flipping, pitching. We're going to be talking about what I use to flip a jig with, what I use to pitch with, and what I use to punch with. And the reason I'm going to go over all 3 at once is because I've kind of got it down now over years and years of perfecting this technique and these techniques. I really use the same setup for all 3 techniques, applications, what have you. And we'll go over that. There is some little nuanced deals where I will switch up my setup a little bit, which we will get into. But for the most part, I use the same setup for all 3 presentations. And we'll kind of get into little different things I do with each one. But I get a lot of questions about my punching setup, but I figured, I use the same setup for punching that I do the other 2 applications. So like I said, I'm just going to round them all into one video here. And this might go a little bit long because most of you that have been following me for a long time, though I am not a professional, I am not an expert by any means when it comes to any technique, but this is what I would say I spend 90% of my time doing while just fun fishing or tournament fishing out here on Lake Okeechobee. Flipping, punching, pitching, whatever you want to call it. It's just my favorite way to catch a bass. A topwater bite is exhilarating. Catching them every cast on a rattle trap or a crankbait while they're schooling is fun. A bump on a worm is, everyone loves that. But there is just nothing better than making a short, accurate pitch, presenting that bait perfectly to a reed into a mat, and either seeing that line jump or just going to engage the reel and the line's heavy, cracking them with the big hook set, with the big rod, no drag, lockdown, just kind of, hand-to-hand combat, tug of war sort of deal, and boat swinging a 7-pounder in the boat. It's just, I don't know what it is about it. I love it. It gets me into a lot of trouble in tournament situations because even when flipping or pitching, whatever you want to call it, is not the deal, there's a lot of us out there that always just try to make that bite happen or make it work. I always say when I don't have anything on the line, if I'm not pre-fishing for an event, if I have guide fish figured out and located for upcoming trips, this is what I do. I put these 3 rods in my boat and I go fishing for the day. And I'll quite literally never make a cast. I just flip all day. And there's times where I'll flip for 8 hours and never get a bite, and that's fine. If I can catch one or none, it's just the way I like to fish. I'm not sure what it is about it. So this is something that I could talk about for hours. So hopefully I can narrow it down to just a few minutes for you guys here. So here's the first thing I'm going to point out to you guys, and this goes for anybody who's looking to start flipping or pitching. And this may not be right, but this is just something I've noticed because here's the deal, guys. I get a lot of you watching this have probably been past customers of mine that have done this. I get a lot of requests for guide trips that people just want to go out and learn flipping, whether it's punching mats, whether it's how to flip a jig, whether it's just pitching a beaver around. I just get people that are new to it and they want to learn it. And one of the things I've noticed after teaching dozens and dozens and dozens of people this technique is A 7-11 or 8-foot rod is kind of the industry standard anymore when it comes to this technique. Something I tell people, when you're first starting out, do not be afraid to pick up a 7.4 or a 7.6 rod to do this with, especially when it comes to pitching. And what I'm going to say with pitching is, like, when you're using a half or a 3/4, even a 1 ounce weight, when you're not punching, when you're not trying to put a big weight through a mat, when you're essentially just laying that bait up against a thing of round reeds, Kissimmee grass, cattails. With that technique, a 7.4 or even a 7.6 is kind of the standard. It's going to be more comfortable. It's not going to fatigue you as much, and most of the time, people are more accurate. With that being said, there are a lot of people that win all their money fishing this pond out here that use a 7.6. I know people that flip mats with a 7.6 that are amazing mat fishermen. Okay, so don't think you need to have the 7-11 rod. My wife Breezy, she's shorter than me, and there was a time when we first started dating where she absolutely hated flipping. She hated it. And after a year or two of fishing together, she's like, yeah, I'm just not good with it. I'm not accurate. Now, Breezy's 5 foot nothing. And here she is flipping with a 7-11 rod. And one day it dawned on me, like, well, that rod is so long and you're so low to the water. No wonder. So I switched her over to a 7.6, and it made all the difference in the world. Now, flipping's still not her favorite thing to do, but she's way more efficient when she does do it. So if you are maybe a little bit shorter, don't be afraid to go to a shorter rod. Use what works for you. So that's the first thing I'm going to say out of the gate. Now, with that being said, the rod that I use for all three applications is a 7-11 rod. I will use a 7.6 when flipping fluorocarbon. There are times where I like pitching around a Senko style bait on 20, 25 pound fluorocarbon with like a 1/4 ounce weight, light flipping. I'll use a 7.6 medium heavy or a 7.6 heavy. There's times where I am flipping braid, but maybe I'm just flipping a 1/2 ounce weight. It is very rare out here on Lake Okeechobee, but there are times where I do it. And there's times where I go to different lakes and things where we are using the smaller weight. Sorry, there's flies in here. And I'll go to a 7.6 heavy at that time. But 99 times out of 100, when I'm flipping out here on the lake, a 3/4 ounce weight is the lightest weight I'll go to. And there's a couple reasons for that. A, I catch them on a 3/4 in 10 inches of water and pitching it to literally one stalk of a reed, and they still eat it. So what that 3/4, the heavier weight does is it actually will make you more accurate. There's more weight to try and, once I get in that rhythm, I could kind of be more accurate with a little bit of a heavier weight. And then what it comes down to is, even if it's slick calm, super shallow water, and I'm fishing very sparse cover, I have confidence in that 3/4 ounce weight. The fish still catch it on the way down. It's not too heavy. They still pick it up off the bottom. And then who knows? I might crank up and run over here and start fishing, and the cover might be a little bit thicker. The wind may pick up, and then I don't have to cut and put a heavier weight on. That 3/4 ounce will usually get me through. So from a 3/4 ounce up, this is the setup I use. Like I said, if I'm going to a 1/2 ounce 7.6, a lot of times I'll use a 7.6. I can flip a 1/2 ounce on this rod, but I just really don't ever do it unless I'm using fluorocarbon with like a Senko or something. And in that case, it's a 7.6, usually a medium heavy, sometimes a heavy, 20-pound fluorocarbon, and it's usually like a 1/4 ounce weight at that time. All right. So we're going to grab this guy here. This is, again, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I just want you guys to hear what I'm saying. This is the setup I use for a 3/4 ounce weight, whether I'm just pitching Kissimmee grass, pitching reeds, pitching cattails. If I go up, that's a 3/4 ounce weight with like a beaver style bait. If I'm flipping what we call chop grass mats, which is a lot of times where the cattails are there, and it's not like a pennywort mat, it's not a hyacinth or a lettuce mat where it's really thick and you usually got to use a heavy, pretty good sized weight to get through. Chop grass is usually, we're talking about pepper grass, eelgrass, hydrilla, mats that are just kind of caused from using trolling motors or big motors running through grass beds. It chops that grass up, it floats up, it's really light and thin, and it blows up against a cattail head, a round reed, or even just a hard wall. Sometimes that chopped grass mat will stick out in front of those reeds. And sometimes a 3/4 ounce is a little bit light to get through it efficiently. So I'll go to a 1 ounce or a 1 1/4 ounce weight, okay, to get through that. I still use this same rod and reel. And then my standard 1.5 ounce weight, which is what I traditionally use to flip mats with when we're talking pennywort, water lettuce, hyacinth. 1.5 ounce weight's usually my standard. If there's not a lot of wind at all, or there hasn't been, so the mats aren't very tucked up and real tight together, I will go down to 1.25 ounces. But for the most part, that 1/4 ounce isn't going to make a big difference on getting bites. All right, you can, that 1.5 ounce weight, you want it to fall fast and things. What the smaller weight does is it kind of makes your landing ratio go up, because the smaller the weight, the less it's going to blow their mouth open, the better you can peg that fish. But I traditionally, if I just am going to flip mats, it's 1.5 ounce weight. Now, a lot of you are probably going to ask, well, why not a 2 ounce? Then a lot of people use a 2 ounce. I try my best to not flip a 2 ounce weight. And the reason for that is my landing ratio just isn't as good, because it's a heavier weight. It's going to blow their mouth open. And then that's just an extra 1/2 ounce of weight swinging on your line when that big fish comes up and head shakes and things. Here's the deal. If I am using a 2 ounce weight, which I very rarely do, I can count on one hand the times I've had to do it, I will not flip this rod. This rod's rated up to 1.5 ounces, and it just doesn't handle a 2 ounce the best. I'll go to an extra heavy, okay? But that very rarely ever happens. So what this is a 7-11 heavy, not an extra heavy rod. This is an Arc Essence rod. There's every rod manufacturer out there makes a 7-11 heavy flipping rod. This is not a sales pitch. This is my favorite one I've used. That's why I use it for all 3 applications. The third application is flipping a jig. I have a jig tied on here. This is a 3/4 ounce jig, which is what I always flip when I'm flipping the jig out here. If we get some wind, I'll go to a 1 ounce. This is I think this is actually a Fitzgerald jig. They don't make anymore. I'll flip this. The Medlock jig is probably the industry standard for down here in Okeechobee. Gambler Jigzilla is my favorite one. They don't make it anymore. Little Birdie told me they might be coming back into production. Wink, wink, shh, shh. But that's my favorite. And I've just got a Gambler burner crawl in there. So 3/4 ounce weight to 1.5 ounces and a flipping jig. This is the rod I use. Now, I feel like everybody thinks heavy cover, flipping, I need a heavy action rod. Or a extra heavy I've seen. You want that rod to bend. What the beauty of this rod is that you guys aren't going to be able to see it, but the tip on this rod, it's heavy enough where it's got enough backbone and bend to where it's got enough tip to where I could flip that lighter weight, that 3/4 ounce weight. It's got a light enough tip to where I could check my fish. And what that means is if I'm not sure if I felt a tick on the way down or felt a bite, I can lift on the fish and that rod will just bend a little bit. Enough where I could feel it's a fish, but it's light enough to where that fish doesn't feel a lot of resistance. On top of that, that light weight or that light tip lets me lay that bait into the grass easier. A lot of people always say, man, I'm not good at laying that weight in the grass very quietly. It's always super loud. Get you a flipping rod with a good tip. A lot of people think they want a broomstick. You don't. You don't want that. You're going to pull hooks on fish and you're not going to be as accurate. You're not going to be as quiet. Right now, with the lake being somewhat high, quiet presentations, I don't think are as big of a deal. I tell people, don't worry about that. You worry about that, learning how to flip that bait in there with ease and quietly later on down the road. But when it comes to fishing it in real shallow water, then yes, you can spook fish when flipping and your bait landing too loud. Presentation, especially with this technique, can get you a lot of times a lot of extra bites, or even if it's an extra bite or two, when you're talking about flipping, sometimes those 2 extra bites are 7, 8, 9 pounders. So, you do want to work on that, but don't let that be your sole purpose when it comes to flipping. but get you a rod with a good tip. A lot of people don't think about that. The only thing I could tell you about this rod too, the reason I like it's a 711, but it flips like a 7.6. And I'm not sure exactly how to explain that, but I mean, I'm 5'11", so I'm not tall. I'm just kind of an average sized guy, but I like a 711 action rod. I like it a little bit longer. I'm more accurate with it. Again, I could use this rod for all three techniques. I can get away with a 7.6. I used to. But when it comes to punching mats with an 1.5 ounce weight, I just will not do it without a 711 rod. That's the size rod that works for me. I like it. So now that I've found this rod that I can do all three with, I don't have to adjust to the different length of rod. I could use it for everything. And a big reason the 711 helps is because that's 5 extra inches of line pickup on a hook set. When you flip in a mat, sometimes you set the hook and the fish is running out towards you. So sometimes you'll set the hook, and this goes for flipping grass and things too. When you set the hook, if that fish is coming to you, sometimes your line is, let's just say you have a mat. This is turning into just a junky video here, but if you have a mat like my hand here, and you flip to the back side of the mat, you're sitting out here, that fish eats the bait and starts swimming this way. Now your line is going like this, around this mat and out the other side. So when you set the hook, the line's going to cut through the mat before it gets to the fish. And sometimes having that 5 extra inches of line pickup, meaning that 711 rod, is the difference between getting tight and poking that fish and the barb not penetrating the fish's mouth, versus getting tight, penetrating the fish's mouth right through his eyes, and you got the fish hooked. Does that make sense? See what I'm saying? That's where, having that longer rod, it's just more line pickup, and you can move the fish a little bit easier a lot of times. But with that being said, that's what works for me. A lot of people use a 7.6, especially if you're just starting with any kind of flipping presentation. You might want to start with a 7.6. It's a lot easier to be accurate. But if I've recommended this rod to a lot of people and they all love it. It's a good deal. So, 711 heavy rod is what I like to use for most of my applications out here. A reel. I like my ratio to start with a 7, not an 8, not a 6, a 7. 7 to 1. Lew's is like 7.5 to 1. Shimano's 7.2 to 1. And I'm very specific with that because everyone's going to tell you, there's reels out there that are 10 to 1 now, and you can make more flips in a day. That's great. That's great. You make an extra flip and a quarter throughout a 9-hour day, having that much faster of a reel. Whoop-de-doo. But when I flip in there and that fish eats my bait and I set the hook, I want to land the fish. Making extra flips don't make a difference if you're not putting the fish in the boat. Said it a million times in my videos. I'm going to repeat myself again. What you gain in speed, you lose in torque. Okay? When you set the hook on a fish, especially flipping, because you're coming from a dead stop. If you guys watched my last video, I was talking about swim jig fishing. You're constantly reeling that bait. You get the bite. You pull into that fish. You already got momentum on your side. You're dragging the fish to you. With this, you flick that flip. You get the bite. That fish is swimming. Left, right, straight at you. When you set the hook, you're starting from a dead stopped reel. Getting that handle to start turning with a 9, an 8, even an 8 to 1 reel can be difficult. If you go back and watch my Roland's Classic video, me and Kelly were flipping mats. A couple of those fish I caught in the mats were with an 8.5 to 1 reel. It was some new Abu Garcia that came out. It's a badass reel. It's like a $500 reel. It's great. But I don't care what reel it is. I don't care how much it costs. That higher speed reel prevents you from getting the handle to start turning because you have a higher gear ratio. And you basically turn into like a dead zone. You're pulling on the fish, but you can't. And then what happens is the higher the rod gets, because you don't want to stop pulling on the fish, there's more tension on the reel and it gets even harder the higher up you go. I like when I set the hook, when I go to turn the handle, I want it to turn. I want the fish to be moving towards me. 7 to 1 used to be a high-speed reel. It's not anymore. Now it's like middle of the road, and that works for me. This is an arc. This is the new Gravity This is a G5. This is the middle of the road one. I just happen to have it on here. This is not like, I hope this doesn't sound like a commercial for ARC, but this reel's great. And it's a 7-1, 7-2-1. So it's not even like a 7-5-1. I have no issue with it. And when I turn the handle, it wants to turn, especially when, you know, bringing in a big fish. So whatever reel manufacturers you guys like to use, they're all great. Daiwa, Shimano, Luz, or whatever, Abu. But a 7-1 reel is what works for me. This happens to be a left-handed one. I flip so much that half of my flipping rods are left-handed and half are right, because it gives my arms a break and my hands don't get as fatigued. So I'll switch it up. This is a left-handed one, but I use both. 65-pound Suffix Performance braid for all 3 applications. Okay, this works great. It's abrasion resistant. It is quiet in the mats. They do make some higher dollar line anymore, which if I'm flipping mats, you know, I may start experimenting with different stuff. But when it comes to pitching a jig or that 3/4 ounce weight, you're not really putting it in anything. You're almost laying it up along the side. So you don't have to worry about that sawing sound very much. Suffix Performance braids work great for me. So that's what I use. 65-pound test all the time. And that's about, you know, that's about it for the setup. So for the most part, and I've got some different deals here. This one's rigged up. This is just a 3/4 ounce tungsten weight with a single bobber stop. This just happens to be a Reaction Innovation style beaver. But honestly, the truth is, when it comes to flip, like pitching, what I'm going to call pitching, which is just when you're making short underhand casts to sparse cover, this is what I use. A 3/4 ounce. This is a 5/0 Hack Attack, Strike King Hack Attack hook. And like I said, this is a Reaction Innovations beaver. But you could use a Senko style bait, like a big 7 or a 6-inch Senko with this same rig. You can use a craw, like a Gambler Burner craw, like I have here. You can use a brush hog. You can use a lizard. You can use, you know, you guys know I like my missile baits D-bomb. The Gambler Ugly Otter is a big one. You could use a ton of different baits, whatever you have confidence in. I really don't think it matters. The whole presentation and the key to any of these techniques is that fall, that free fall. So whether I'm flipping 1.5 ounces weight, this was just cut off my punch rod. This is 1.5 ounces. This is a Gambler Why Not. Same hook, 5/0 Strike King Hack Attack. This is 1.5 ounces tungsten weight. I got the 3/4 ounce here, and then I've got the jig. With all 3 of those applications, when you're putting it alongside or in the mat or whatever it is, you want to make that short, accurate flip, and you want the reel free spooled. What I like to do is make a flip, and right before it hits the water, throw a bunch of slack in my line. The whole presentation to any of these flipping techniques is that fast fall. You're making that fish react. I was telling my customers today, you know, what's cool is with this technique is when you're throwing a spook, when you're throwing a rattle trap, a spinner bait, you're throwing it at fish that are in position to actively feed. Okay, so the fish are set up on a point or they're laying in the hydrilla trying to ambush bait. When you're pitching and flipping and punching, a lot of times you're targeting fish that have no intentions of eating. They're in those reeds, they're under that mat chilling. But when this thing falls literally that fast by their face, I'll do that again. When it comes through that mat or lays down in that little clump of Kissimmee grass and does this, you see how quick it falls. It's just the reaction to grab it. I think half the time they grab it and they don't even know there's anything in their mouth. Sometimes when you get that bite and you lift and you can't tell if it's a fish, it's just heavy. I feel like a lot of times they don't even know they ate. It's just their instinct as opportunistic feeders to grab that bait. So that's what's cool about it. Free spool it. A lot of people are too worried about feeling the bite on the way down. I see people when they first get on the boat, they flip it and try to lower the, you're not going to get bit like that. That fish is getting a good look at the bait. It's just not what you want to do. You don't need to feel the bite. Flip it, let it go limp. And then what I do is I watch my line. Sometimes you'll see the line tick. Other times you don't see anything. You'll just engage the reel and you'll go, and it's just heavy. Swing, set the hook. It's probably a fish on there. You don't need to feel the bite. It's almost better if you don't. Fish doesn't feel resistance and you don't rush the hook set. So having a complete slack line on the initial fall is the key with all three techniques: jig, pitching a lightweight, what I consider this, and punching. When you get the bite, reel down, obviously set the hook. The only difference is when I'm flipping a big weight, 1.25 ounces and up, when I get the bite, I'll tend to really reel down and almost just pull back on the fish. Again, this is a big weight, okay? That's gonna sometimes blow their mouth open and then the hook won't get them. So a lot of times I'm almost just eventually, when I'm punching mats, I try to snug the hook into their mouth. You can do a little bit more of a slack line hook set with the jig or the smaller weight because there's not as much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not gonna blow them open. There's not as much to snag on and things, but in a mat, flip in there. A lot of people think you want to rear back and crack them in those mats. Very rarely do I do that. I try my best just to reel down and just keep lifting, and the heavier it gets, just kind of pull back and turn the handle and just snug that hook in them. It'll just almost, finesse it in there, if you will. So besides that, that's about it. Whatever style flipping bait you like will work. 65-pound braid on all of them. And that's what I use. I just did a video the other day on like when I like to flip a jig versus a beaver style bait, because when I'm flipping a jig like this, very rarely am I trying to put it into something. Like right now, we'll be going down the outside edge of the lake and there's big fields of Kissimmee grass. Oftentimes I don't flip this if I'm trying to put it in the Kissimmee grass because there's a lot of appendages, there's a lot of skirts or skirt strands and whatnot, and the bait won't, again, you won't get that fast free fall. It'll snag on the way down. It doesn't go through as easy as just a Texas rig plastic will just, fall through there. But when I'm pitching really sparse cover and we're dealing with around what we should have right now, but we really don't, a lot of bluegill will move up on the beds and these big fish will target these spawning bluegill. This is a great way to imitate an injured or just a big brim falling in their face. It's a big profiled bait, and a lot of people are kind of scared of the jig, I feel like, but it's my favorite way to catch them. So if you're trying to put it, into some thicker stuff, that Texas rigged beaver style bait is usually the way to go. But the jig's fun. That's about it. 7-Eleven, hopefully this video didn't make me sound stupid. 7-Eleven rod or a 7.6, whatever works for you. I always use 65-pound braid. Again, we're talking about Okeechobee. If I was fishing other bodies of water, maybe I'd go down to 50. Maybe I'd flip 25-pound fluorocarbon. But out here, 65-pound braid's kind of the standard. And that's about it. This is, the lake's dropping, so the punching bite, the mat bite's kind of going away. There's not going to be as much water under the mats. But as far as flipping a jig or just getting out there to get a lot of bites, pitching like a standard Texas rig, now through the next 2 months is arguably one of the best times to get out there and just get bites. It's a great way to catch some big fish as well. But, you get out there on a shad spawn when them fish are feeding up on the outside edge. You could pitch, into that Kissimmee grass, and it's a good way to go out and get a lot of bites. The best way to get comfortable with flipping, and I tell everybody this, and this is what I do on my guide trips when people want to learn it, go fishing on the right day. Don't go out there when it's blowing 35 and everything you want to flip has 2-foot rollers in it. Pick a day where there's light wind, the conditions call for it to be a good flipping day, and just bring 2 flipping rods. Take everything out of your boat and go out and do it. It's super efficient. It's super effective for both numbers and big fish, and you'll fall in love with it real quick. So if you guys want to come out and me to kind of show you the little I know about flipping, let me know. We could book a trip, and we could just spend the morning going out there and doing it. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm not sure what the next my setup will be. Maybe a chatterbait. I don't even remember which ones I've done. But let me know what you thought about the video. hopefully I start slowing down a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, where I can actually go out and film some fishing videos myself. It's been forever. But yeah, appreciate you guys watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. And I guess we will see you guys on the next one. Tie lines, guys.